that I can help you, take my brain, take my hands, take my feet, take my voice. I will amplify whatever you need me to, so long as it aligns what I believe in. So that's where I then met Dr. Aditi and DJ, these two incredible, wonderful people who really have been such supportive people. They're further in their careers and have, of course, have more experience than me, but they have been my angels on my shoulder, guiding me and supporting me and reminding me that, I may be young, but truly I have the possibilities of creating a better South Carolina. Meeting people like Aditi and DJ are the reason why I can keep on doing this. I'm gonna pass it.
I guess I will say, 6 years ago, I came into Columbia, South Carolina with the sole purpose to pursue a degree and leave. I came into a flood where immediately I learned who the haves and the have-nots are. And I came into a time where the current president was gearing up to what would become a successful campaign, and now 4 years of presidency. And it was, I will be very honest, the first time in my life that I really had to reckon with being the other. And I talk about this a lot in my writing. The way that I've been coping is contributing to different magazines and newspapers about ways in which we move the conversation and policies that change the systems that serve all of us forward. And, I was always a firecracker, so I always will ask why, and I'll always stand up and push the status quo. But, the unique landscape of the American South, being very white and Black, I struggled to fit in. But that also made me reckon with the very real anti-Blackness in the South Asian community. And so a lot of this work had been happening, and I look up to a lot of activists and scholars in this space that they had been working on this well before George Floyd. I think George Floyd was the push for the American public to start caring a little bit, whatever caring means to them. And so I knew that my fulfillment in life would come from making sure that I left the path behind me easier for other people, and also better in terms of whether it's their work environment or it's where they live. And so in the last 5 years, I think one of the most rewarding things is connecting with amazing people like Jazmyne and DJ. DJ and I got to meet much earlier on, and I'm sure he can tell some of the changes and kind of emergence that's happened since our program that we were in together. But I really believe that we need people to ask hard questions, and we need people to be okay with some of the consequences that come from activism. And I think that that's what I really reflected on and wanted to share with you all today, is that, it's one thing to be a soundbite in the media, but the real hard work comes from asking questions that do lead to consequences. Sometimes they're good, sometimes you don't see them right away, and sometimes they're not so good for you. But leaning on your support system and people that believe in you to keep the work going, or stepping back and letting someone else lead when things get exhausting. I think that's the biggest lesson that I've taken from some of the work that all of us have done, whether it was through Empower SC or it's through some of our other work, literally knocking on doors in the community.
And I guess I'll pick up from there. Similar to Dr. Aditi, I came down to South Carolina a couple years ago. Similarly, to get my degree, I came down with my wife. She finished her master's in library information science a couple years ago. We both came down to South Carolina. She's going to get her master's. I was get my PhD, and we were going to get out of here. We're going to go, I don't know, anywhere else. But since I've been down here, I think what has been a revelation is this idea of there's a difference between studying, the history of the South and then being a part of the South. raising a 3-year-old Black boy in the South, knowing that, I'm going to have her son. It's like my hometown is Columbia, South Carolina, and what that means. And understanding that when you talk about the history of civil rights, this history of many rights, this has been the battleground over and over and over again. And most of the gains of those movements have not been felt by the people who most fought for those movements. You can see many of the gains of the civil rights movement has kind of passed many communities in the South by. And I think in the last couple months, especially in 2020, what I've come to learn so much is you can be passionate, you can be academic, you can learn, you can be humble, and try to listen to others. But at the same time, what is probably the hardest to do, and I think sometimes most important, is to hope for more. You can hope for more and you can imagine more. I was part of the Columbia's City Citizens Advisory Council. And, when I first became a part of that, I was like, this is a good thing. I'm happy to be a part of this. I'm happy we have this. And in 2020, I've come to say, you know what? Fine, that's good. But we can ask for more. And yes, you will probably find time and time again that you'll be disappointed when you ask for more. But then you open your mind and you open others' minds and you open others' hearts to want more. And when you put that desire for more in people's hearts, then you can spark change. And yes, people will continue to be disappointed, but you can't satiate that thirst once you have it. You can't satiate that thirst for more justice, for more equity, for more justice once people imagine it.
I can't tell you how many people I've heard say in some fashion or form, why don't you just keep your head down and do your work?
Yeah.
And that's normally in conversations where I'm being told that I'm divisive or a troublemaker. And it hurts. I mean, it hurts to hear that, but it also gives you that fire and kind of drive to want to do more. One of the things I love about all three of us is that we are trying to find that perfect balance of bringing that academic scholarship out into the community to help people build the skills to either communicate their point effectively, or in a manner that's actionable and something comes of it, or it's to provide that historical context of why things are the way they are. And I think that that's a really unique place to be in. There's not a lot of people before us that have done that in Columbia. And so we're kind of paving our way in bridging that. And that has been very unique, but also on both sides, there's a little bit of distrust you have to navigate, right? On the academic side, it's like, are you a true academic? And on the community side, it's like, are you really in the community, or do you just read books and like come to tell us what to do, right? And so that's been interesting as well. But I think, as we've seen over the summer, it takes intentional time and effort without any recognition, because that's not the point. The point is not the recognition, to really make some of those relationships happen. I was just thinking about that, DJ, as you were mentioning some of those things.
It's so true that the recognition is just not what it's about at all. For instance, there was a food drive that we all worked on with Empower SC, and a phrase kept ringing in my head about just making sure that our community here remembered that I was here not to just say, this is what you need, and I'm going to then leave you. This is what I know that you guys have been communicating to me, actually. You guys have been showing this not just in data, but in anecdotal stories. When I go out to the community, when I speak to you in the grocery store, when I see that you're struggling to decide between fresh food or something that might be a little bit more unhealthy, I understand that struggle because I have been in that life my entire life, of seeing my mother balance a checkbook, but also trying to make sure her kids eat and have a full fridge. So doing something where it was in solidarity and not just an act to get recognition for myself or for a title or any sort of thing, bringing attention to the fact that at that point, the CARES Act was going to be running out of money, and we have millions of people across the country, tens of thousands in South Carolina, who are not going to make ends meet, who are going to now struggle even further. It's not about the recognition for us. It's about the recognition for that community, right? It's always about the people who do not have the power to go to their city hall or go to talk to city council and say, I need these things. It's about the people who've given up on voting because nothing has happened either way they voted, and realizing and teaching them voting is an exchange. Now that I have hired you, I can now come to your office. I am your constituent. You're supposed to answer to me. And reminding them that we have to take back that power, that really the power is in the people and not in the policymakers, is so, so important. But first you have to connect with them.
That reminds me also, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it does strike me as interesting, and I saw this happen a good bit, where the movement that rose up in May in the wake of George Floyd's murder evolved into how do we take care of each other. And so it was not so much outward facing activism as it was inward facing activism. Can any of you speak to that?
My sister is an activist in upstate New York, and I love talking about her all the time. She is truly one of my heroes. She is an example of activism turning into mutual aid and care for the community. She has created a whole network of fridges that are stocked full of free fresh food in Albany and Troy, New York, that have truly changed communities and neighbors that we grew up with. Recently, she shared a video of a man singing thank you to her. And it's truly about making those connections and showing that I care about you. The people at town hall may have forgotten your name, but I know your name. I know your struggle. I'm there with you, either next door or up the street. And I know that I can advocate for you. So let me. And let me also take care of you in the process. Let me feed you. That's something that's so hard to give up, is to give someone that power to truly help you, to feel like it's not just an act of charity. But again, once you show that genuine care, that radical empathy that we read about, that we talk about all the time, they realize, wow, these are the people in my community, and these are the people that I actually can rely on, that I might be able to go to about voter education and what I can do about a policy change, go to about a pothole. Maybe they can knock on the door, email that lawmaker that just has not been answering my phone call. I'm the person, I always say I'm a megaphone. I'll go shake the table if it needs to happen. So you just have to DM me. You just have to let me know. Once I make that connection with you, it's for life.
Mm-hmm. The whole idea of mutual aid kind of reminds me of a lot of the amazing work that some of us on the Census Committee have done to make it more about everything else, while we elevated the importance of responding to the census. So almost every weekend, I would say August onward leading up to it. And as you all may know, the deadline for it was very contentious. The administration memo would tell us we have to end, but then a judge would decide you have to keep going. We really turned it into taking care of a community while they were taking care of themselves by ensuring that they filled out the census. And that did really require us to think about context all the time. We are doing all of this in a pandemic. All of the activism we've done is in a pandemic. And so we had to be very creative about the ways in which we were able to make those connections. Social media has been great. I will say, you know, we have developed a lot of strong activist networks on Facebook, and people are communicating and sharing resources, but that's not enough for some of our most forgotten, neglected communities, even in Columbia, in our backyard, 5 minutes away from the university. And so it really took us thinking about what are some other needs that would make our communities feel comfortable and make them feel like they are valued, because they are valued. And it took it took a lot more time to do that, but we did it right. We made sure that community champions themselves were helping us knock on doors, to tell them about the free flu shots we had available, the boxes of fresh fruits and vegetables we had available, the doctor on hand to answer any questions that was standing in front of the Arthurtown Community Center for you, and you know, being able to register to vote while completing the census. And so removing a lot of those, I think, often barriers, or whether they're invisible or visible, I think is what made a lot of our efforts very fruitful and rewarding, but also recognizing that you can't talk about one singular issue. You can't talk about the murder of George Floyd without talking about all of these other things that have created this perfect storm. I think that that's what I also learned, is that, you know, you have to put this in context of the very real things that are happening in people's lives. And so I will say it's been nice to have friends like Jazmyne and DJ to go to for my own self-care. It's been nice to see people that have stepped up to provide these good things for folks in the community without any kind of formal recognition. And it's been great to see people pivot about the specific issue that they had been working on and putting it in context of a lot of these other inequities that are coming out of the pandemic.
You know, and when I think about, yes, you know, we think about all this activism against policing abuses in the midst of a pandemic, is, you know, when you see that happening together, a lot of people have been seeing those connections between radical inequities across the system. You see some people who, oh, I would want to be a part of this activism in the street, but I'm scared of, you know, my health problems. And you see that happen over and over again, and people saying, wait, I can't look at these things in isolation. I have to care about others in a different way. Actually, now that I'm looking at this issue in terms of a pandemic, in terms of a pandemic of health problems, in terms of a pandemic of police abuse, actually, our communities are unwell. And I didn't understand how unwell our communities were. And, you know, I don't want to, you know, make a dig at my own university, but, you know, this big call to just move towards a new normal, right? It's like you go log into University of South Carolina, it's like new normal. What does that mean? And it just means that, you know what, in spite of the issues that you're seeing, in spite of everything going on around us, we are asking you to continue to move forward as if everything was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to use sometimes force, whether it be employer force, you need to come in because I say so. We earlier on in this pandemic said we're going to take care of our employees and we're not going to open up unless these thresholds are met from a health standpoint. And then months later say, actually, we're going to ignore that and force you to come in anyway because this is the new normal now. And we're going to apply that monetary force. We're going to apply sometimes police force to make you accept that this is normal, that this is the new reality that you're going to have to live with because we say so.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot accept that. And a lot of people are not accepting that. We are accepting or understanding that things are unwell, our communities are unwell, our society is unwell, and we need to care for each other in more ways. And we need to have officials understand that they have a greater responsibility, a higher responsibility to provide for the people that they say they care for. And if they don't, then we will get rid of them. And if the people in charge that we put in place besides them don't do their job, then we will find ways to do it for ourselves.
And I think that's especially something that is going to happen in South Carolina. We see that, you know, half of us might see that our communities are unwell, and we can see certain disparities but another half of our state thinks the same thing, but is pointing at different issues that may be part of the problem, but they're not really, they're pointing at people and not policy. And that it goes right back into educating and trying to tap into people that we've deemed lost souls, deemed that they may not be able to learn this situation. Well, maybe I can just provide you the resources anyway, and you'll see it for yourself one day, right? Because we want to make sure that we pull everybody in, especially in rural South Carolina, when truly we have forgotten our rural areas. We're blessed here in Columbia. We have many areas here that we've forgotten, but Bamberg and Barnwell and Colton, all these other places are also struggling far, far worse. Imagine not having a hospital in Columbia. You know, these kinds of things that we can take advantage of quite easily. And to me, it's like, you know, yeah, our communities are so sick. And what can we do to change? If we can't build the hospital, what can we do when we know doctors? When we know that we could maybe open a private thing where we have a clinic for a weekend, figuring out those ways to think radically and expand our ideas of what care looks like is really what activism is all about. Right now, I always say COVID is the perfect time to just listen and learn, because we can't act on every little thing that we want to. We want to rush to fix repealing the Heritage Act. We want to fix food disparity in Colombia. We want to fix our police force, but these things are going to take time. And unfortunately, the system is highly organized. It's ingrained. It's been in the same thinking, especially in South Carolina, for decades, for hundreds of years almost. It's going to take that time to get organized too. It's going to take that time to build bridges, burn some bridges at the same time maybe, and really check each other and remind each other to keep on questioning policymakers, keep on questioning the people in power, because again, your vote is an exchange. You owe me now. What can we work to do together? And like DJ said, if you're not going to work with me, what can I do outside of you to make sure that I still take care of my people?
I think you ask a good question about like, what can we do? And I do think that, of course, we can't solve everything right now, but if not now, when it comes to some of these policy changes. And when I say policy, I don't just mean on a national or state level. I know we get bogged down. I mean, we're living it right now. I also mean organizationally, locally, in your neighborhood. Things like how committees are comprised, as DJ referred to, for the Citizen Advisory Panel for the Columbia Police Department. Those are also policy changes. And if there's one thing that gives me hope, it's that all politics are local, and I would say all politics are organizational. And I've learned a lot about how that's where you start. And if I don't harness the momentum now, where there are people either on paper that just want to say the right things, or there are people that actually really want to reckon with their privilege and the way things are and how they're systemically inequitable. If not now, when will I be able to do something like this? And so, Bingo, I really liked when you asked us, a much larger definition of policing, whether it's your behavior, your words, your actions. And that is where I think we can start, is to call people out. And if we don't have the energy or the mental well-being to do so, rely on each other to step up and do that as well. I think about, the ways in which I've been policed in terms of speaking out about things, and it's definitely had a detrimental impact on my mental health. I think back to yesterday, where I'm part of a leadership program, and we were sent a very kind of concerning email about how we've gotten nothing done over the last week, and we're very concerned about your inability to get things done. And this is the same, group that will then say, please have grace as we're trying to figure out how to do this virtually, right? I could have just ignored it and just gotten what they wanted done and been like, no, here you go. I took the time to be, to again, represent my class and say, this is an unprecedented time. We are not only balancing this program, we're balancing the demands of being at home with our kids. We're balancing the demands of other causes that we care about that have stemmed out of this pandemic. And we are balancing our own mental health and well-being. And so for you to put us on the same timeline and same expectation as every other group of people that have come through this program is contrary to what you've also expressed that you need from us, which is grace. That was an exhausting email to write. You always have a little bit of doubt in the back of your head about whether or not you should do it. But the things that came from that immediately were, oh my gosh, we realized that we did this wrong. Like, please let us know what timeline will work for you. Thank you so much for all the things you guys have been all involved in election day. And it's those small things that I think we need to start doing, right? So that may have been a small practice or policy change that moving forward, they'll take a step back and assess, like, what is the context of what we're expecting them to do? What are some other things that we need to consider about this group of people that's different from other groups that we've worked with? And so, and I know, Bingo, you'd asked me what are some things we can do now? Those are some of the things that we could be doing now. I also think it's possible for us to work within the system while we dismantle it. And so one example I'll give you is, we were very lucky early on in Empower SC to get a meeting with the mayor, the city manager, and some other folks. And I agree that we have to I agree that we have to be radical in the way that we want to see things change. And I think that we have to hold our elected officials accountable. But I also believe that if we want some small incremental or small wins to come along, we have to communicate in a way that is balancing both of those kind of, these are the people in power, these are things that we want from the people in power as their constituents. And I think one of the areas that we saw some opportunities for growth was really coming in prepared and realizing that a trusting relationship is the best relationship. And that if we want to see change fast, we have to work with what we've got. And too often, we'll come in with good intentions, but the message will be very antagonizing. And we saw that happen in one of our meetings where one of the elected officials that had given us 2 hours of their time was like, absolutely not, we're not having this discussion any further. And that was hard. That doesn't mean that, they won't work with us in the future, but it made us really realize, like, how does activism look when you're trying to work with people that want to work with you, but also want to stay elected, right? So that was an interesting lesson to learn, that if we want to have change happen now, we have to work within the systems and find a mutual or common set of lexicon or language that we can use to make some of these changes happen, even if it's behind the scenes. I don't know if anyone else wants to reflect on that experience, but that's something I think of right away.
Well, that actually speaks to a question that somebody posed in the Q&A that I think we'd like to hear you all expand on. Alana Jordan asks, I think we can all agree that our country is divided. Do you have any thoughts or advice on how to help build a bridge between the two sides to communicate in a more productive way?
I think kind of what Aditi was just saying, it is about trying to, once you have that seat at the table with them, figuring what that language looks like once you get there. For instance, with working with Repeal the Heritage Act, that is quite a divisive argument for legislators, especially now in an even redder state house. Changing the argument from it's about racism to it's about local control. It's about letting communities choose who their heroes are. The state should not control what Fort Mill wants to have on their public spaces. That appeals to a conservative, right? When we hear something about smaller government, if they're still there, they're still not stuck in just a way of trying to induce fear about removing and giving this power about monuments and about what history is. It's not about revising. It's not about omission of history. It's about rebuilding communities that actually reflect the people and what they believe in. For instance, Fort Mill, my hometown, has a monument called Happy Slave. When I was walking through a park one day, I was about 11 years old and saw that and realized This isn't real. What is a happy slave? I've never heard of this. I was 11 and I knew that this was wrong. And it's still there, despite the protests all summer that have happened, despite the push to repeal, despite the fact that Rock Hill joined in and said, we also want Confederate Park renamed. We have streets that are named after villains in our history, traitors to this country. But we can't have that kind of language always when we're speaking to Republicans or speaking to someone who doesn't believe that systemic racism exists. We have to remind them that it's not even just letting supremacists be renamed or letting Strom Thurmond be taken down off of USC's campus. It's about the communities that suffered for decades under these monuments. It's about the pain that we induced as a state that we are protecting now through this legislation that is unconstitutional as deemed by our own attorney general. And that was a knee-jerk reaction to the removal of the Confederate flag in 2000. This was just a instinctual knee-jerk reaction from the GOP. And unfortunately, we are stuck with it until someone does agree to repeal. And the State House, again, like I said, we've lost several seats. The mountain was always going to be steep. The battle is just going to be a little bit steeper now. You know, the climb is just going to be a little harder. But the conversations will continue. It's now just speaking with someone else, making that connection again, seeing how they lean, knocking on their doors, or going onto their office and saying, hey, I'm Jazmyne. I work with Repeal the Heritage Act, and I want to talk about empowering your district, making sure your district is happy with the heroes that they have in their public space. Is it just about racism to me? Yes. But I do want to make sure that these leaders hear me out, hear my message. And sometimes it's about tailoring the language.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when I hear that, you know, I think about the importance of code switching, right? Knowing what you're talking about and how you're going to talk about it, when and where. Because I'm going to be unapologetically who I am and what I believe, no matter where I speak. And there are spaces where like unvarnished, unrestricted anger have a completely valid place. And I will never take anyone's right to express that. But, you know, when you speak about, you know, going to or getting a meeting with an elected official who may be potentially on your side and be a potential ally, but, you know, they have reservations. It's not always about like changing your language, but being able to find, and I don't mean to say it's like find common ground, you know, that cliche, but the idea is like, this is what I believe. This is what I want. But this is how this helps you. So you can agree with me on why I want this, and I will have that conversation with you. But let's say you don't want to accept my assumptions. You don't want to meet me on my passion, but you could meet me on this policy. And here's why this policy makes sense from a different direction. Mm-hmm. So I'm not letting go of what I believe. I'm not accepting that what I believe is wrong. And I'm not going to allow you to make it feel like what I believe is wrong. But I'm going to say that this policy, this change, this growth, and this room for transformation can be something that you agree with from where you come from as well. Mm-hmm. And finding where that comes from as well, I think, you know, it makes it so that you are authentic to yourself, and people will trust you more for that.
Mm-hmm. It makes me reflect on a recent meeting I had with an elected official who has very different political ideologies than I do. And, you know, he mentioned that I know you do some research on systemic racism. I don't believe that that exists. I don't think that that is real. America is not a racist country. And, you know, I just think that it's other factors. It's socioeconomic factors. And so one of the kind of metaphors, I don't know if this is a metaphor, I mean, but examples that have helped me to at least get the conversation started is I looked at him and I said, for the purposes of our discussion today, I want you to remove all emotion out of the concept of racism. I want you to not think about the times you've heard someone say something messed up, think about all the social media stuff. I don't want you to think about any of that. I don't want you to think about racism as an interpersonal thing. I don't want you to think about it as you and I having a conversation and someone said something that was offensive. What I want you to think about racism as is simply the way things are set up. And he's a lawyer. So I said, so I want you to think about the different laws and policies that you believe have had differential impacts on people. And I know you say that for you, it's a socioeconomic thing. So let's go with that. Let's talk about why we have these different socioeconomic groups and why, particularly in the South, it's almost synonymous that people of color are in a lower socioeconomic status in many cases, not all the time, but in many cases. And so when we approached it that way, where you didn't all of a sudden be like, you're wrong, or I didn't dwell on that term systemic racism, that conversation ended up being almost 2.5 hours long. And we both left with an understanding of like, sure, I don't call it that, but I see what you see as a problem. And I'm willing to talk to you about the ways in which we can fix that problem. Because at the end, not only will it fix your, quote, systemic racism, as he would think, but it also fix my concern about socioeconomic classes being so, having so many disparities in that. I think that it's really listening in the beginning and finding those nuggets that you can then build your case off of. Because I think that, and I still believe and hold the hope that Americans believe in two things. They believe that everyone should have an opportunity to succeed. And they believe that this is a country that they care about and want to see do well, right? And so one of the other things I also like to say is I love my country. I'm a proud first-generation immigrant, and my parents came here for a better opportunity. But I also know that in order for it to be the best, I'm always going to ask questions. So my question asking is not me not being a patriot, right? And so it's using some of those words that I found to be really useful, whether it's a dinner conversation or a formal conversation with an elected official. That was a great question.
Thank you all. So we have another from Penny Cothran. Did the three of you come from activist families? This is a 3-part big question that I will give you each 1 minute to answer. I'm just kidding. Did the three of you come from activist families? Who were your role models? Who are your role models in South Carolina?
Okay, first answer is no, I did not. My whole family is just absolutely surprised that this is where Jazmyne's ended up, and my sister as well. I think that goes into being two biracial women in New York who then experienced what life is like in the South, and I've grown up here since for now 13 years. And realizing the privileges that I have in my skin and my body and my identities, and knowing how to wield that, not just as a shield, but also as a weapon. So my grandma used to go to marches. I actually recently learned that, and she was very, very proud of me for carrying on that legacy as a McCrae, as a Black woman. But no, I actually did not come from an activist family at all. We didn't talk about race in a majority white household. I was the other, but we never discussed it fully. As for activists and icons and role models in South Carolina that I really look up to, Honoree Monteith, our first Black woman in USC, Miss Celia Saxon, who I hope to see Strom Thurmond Wellness Center be changed for one day, hopefully, Dr. Gunter. The women that have come before, the Black women that have come before us in civil rights, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer is everything to me. These are the women that I look up to. These are my heroes. My mother for persevering despite systemic issues against women, against single women that she experienced. Those are my heroes, yeah.
I'll go next. It's funny, if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, do I come from an activist family? I would have said no, because it's not what my father and mother were. My father was someone who, took me to the public library all the time and had me doing like book reports on Black history all the time. And so I was always raised in that. But, as I got older, I realized, a lot of my extended family had a little bit more. I was like, oh, some of my uncles, uncles, mostly my father's friends, right? Oh yeah, I mean, they were union teachers in New York City, but also, I go around their house and they have, pictures of their father with a lot of influential people, and it's funny, that's the Brathwaite family. Elambre Brath, Kamal Brathwaite. That was my family too. And I just didn't know about them really in that way until I got older. And it's like, oh, maybe I understand that now. But when I actually think about my role models, though, I think more about my great grandmother, Sylvia Polite. She didn't pass away until I was a freshman in college, and I spent a lot of time with her growing up. And I say a lot of times, her last couple of years were really rough because she had dementia. And there were long periods of time, those last like 2-3 years, where she wouldn't always recognize me. But the last time I saw her was actually the day I was going to college. And there was like a brief period of time where like she remembered who I was and she understood I was going to college. And like the last thing she said to me, the last thing I remember her saying to me before, I left and, she passed away a couple months later was, DJ, I'm proud of you. Just remember to be good, like you've always been. Those were the last words I ever heard my great grandmother say to me. And I always remember that. And so whenever I normally get down, that's normally what I think about. Am I being good? And how can I be better? How can I continue to do good, be good, practice goodness? So that's how I answer that one.
So I think I'm still having a little bit of imposter syndrome because I feel like I don't do enough as a lot of other activists. So that question was hard for me. So I was like, I don't know if you guys see me as one. I just know that I'm doing my best to make things easier and better for the people of color that come after me. I did not grow up in a family of activists here in the US, but I have both my grandfathers were freedom fighters in India, and I used to hear stories about the liberation after British rule. And I really didn't know what it meant until I got a lot older and kind of reckoned with my whole life wanting to just, quote, assimilate and fit in, to realizing that it's amazing to be different and it's amazing to be brown. And so I think, though, that my parents instilled me with the passion and the energy to always want to ask why. And one of the things I love about going back to them when things get hard or when I'm exhausted is that their immediate concern is always about my well-being, not to tell me what I did right or wrong. And I think that is something, a lesson that I take in my personal life and hopefully one day when I have a family as well. In terms of role models, my role model definitely has to be my dad, who came with very little and a lot of childhood trauma and raised some amazing girls. And I think about all that he has sacrificed. He doesn't talk about it a lot, but he'll talk about sitting at a street light because he didn't have electricity, because he had this idea of America being where he was going to get to. And I think about how he's been treated, how many glass ceilings he hasn't been able to break, but still feels like he's achieved the American dream, right? It's that making it better for all the Black and brown kids coming after him, where they don't have to modify their American dream to achieve, that they're able to achieve exactly what they set out to do with no barriers. And so every time I talk to him, he always has this way of putting things in perspective that keeps my momentum and desire to do good going. And I think that in South Carolina, my biggest role models have actually been Black women that I'm lucky to call my friend. One woman in particular, some of you may know her, is China Phillips. She always calls to remind me that, Aditi, when decisions get hard, remember to lead with your values, because when you lead with your values, you're leading with integrity. And so it's those types of friendships that have turned into sometimes mentorships or role models that have made this work so fulfilling. And sorry to get emotional, but yeah, that's my story.
Well, I think you have to be emotional. You know, it's so very, very personal, and passionate, right? I mean, that's what I'm feeling is passionate. So we have another question from Tanisha Slimpa, and I apologize if that's incorrect. They say, I'm thinking about those who are in power and trying to work with them to get what everyone needs, for example, policies. Do you think that everyone needs a cultural competence training conference something? I believe this would help us deal with our own bias and why it's so ingrained in us, for example, the iceberg model. So does everyone need help? Does everyone need competence training?
I don't know if it's that term. I think that some people think that they've checked off a box and racial equity has been achieved. So no, in that sense. But do I think that everybody's on a separate journey with reckoning with the historic and systemic trauma associated with racism in this country? Sure, yes. And in that case, I do believe that organizations, specifically nonprofit and socially conscious organizations, really need to put their money where their mouth is and realize that their work cannot be done effectively without constantly reckoning with systemic racism. And so in that sense, there's a lot of different ways to do that. One thing I would caution against is to not rely on your Black and brown staff to do the work for you. There are people that need to be paid for their time to do this work and help you move forward this work in your organization. Too often you see people be tokenized like, oh, you're a Black executive leader, tell us what we should do, right? It should be up to that Black or brown person to say, I'd like to share my experience with you. And DJ, this makes me think about our environmental justice conversation, where we all agreed to have a conversation about what environmental justice means in the context of racism. And at the end, a leader in that group said to us, isn't it interesting how this entire conversation didn't even talk about the environment? It talked about people. You know, they said something like that. And I got really upset about that. And I said, we don't have to be here to teach you why environmental justice is more than just clean air and clean water. We have chosen to be here, and this is an opportunity for you to learn from us. And so I think that that's an example of making sure that when you're on those paths, you really are focusing on the impact of what's happening to your Black and brown staff, as well as you're doing things equitably, which is paying people for their time, creating a very intentional space for this work to happen, and making sure that you set the standard that everyone's going to come along, whether or not they want to acknowledge it, everyone's going to come along. We don't care about your political beliefs because this isn't politics. Equity is not political. It should have never been political. It is a human issue. Obviously, this is an issue very close to me, so I'm going to stop there.
I'm going to add that it doesn't just start with adulthood. It starts in K through 12. These conversations need to be ingrained into your education system for change to really happen. I drone on all the time that really the power is in our young people, that if you looked at the statistics of who voted for who under 30, it would be a very different election. There is an awakening for our young folks, especially for people who they don't have the capability to vote yet. They are seeing COVID happen. They're seeing racial injustices happen daily. They're seeing a president that can't deny racism exists, can't tell supremacists to actually, be denounced. We see a different message be spewed there. And we need to teach our students, our children, that this is wrong and this is why it's wrong, and making it an equitable classroom, but also a diverse, I hate to say that word because it's really not the best for what I mean, but a diverse narrative for our history classrooms, for our English classrooms. In math, we need to realize that there are systemic issues and systemic ideas and biases ingrained in our teachers of who can qualify for being an AP and honors, and what we need to do there with our teachers as well to break those barriers down in their ideas, so we actually can boost our children and make sure that they learn, make sure that they understand that it's not that they're dumb, that there's biases against them. Kids know this. They just don't have the words for it. Giving them the words will change this community. Actually teaching them in classroom, in plain English, what racism is, why this country does have its roots in slavery, does still have these systemic issues, and why they may not look the same as they did in 1719. Well, they look very different now in 2020, but we're still facing the same issues. So really just education all around. It's not about a cultural competency. It's about reforming what education looks like and what we're teaching our young kids.
And, I think the last thing I would add is, yes, we have to start at the K-12 level. And I think part of what I would add is, we need to move and teach with a certain amount of humility. We to teach, we actually have to teach history and all these subjects with a vast level of humility to expand past boundaries. I think about people says oh, I want to learn so much about American history, and it's all about, in many people's perspective, when we win wars, right? But understanding that America and Americans are just one of many people on this earth, and understanding our own place in it, and understanding our own connectedness in it. Because when you understand connectedness, you understand that communities cannot thrive alone. South Carolina can't thrive without Montana doing well. The United States cannot thrive without Canada and Mexico doing well. The Western Hemisphere cannot thrive without Eastern Europe and the Middle East doing well. That what is happening in every single community affects each other. And that only comes with an understanding of and teaching of a level of humility. Not to teach conquest history or victorious history or patriotic history of greatness, but teaching the connectedness of between people and communities.
Man, y'all are talking to the educator in me today. I'm telling you. So we have one last question from Omari Fox. Is intersectionality effective from your perspective? What is the price or toll on you personally / professionally, if any?
Intersectionality is necessary. And intersectionality is effective when it's done correctly. Now, the thing about, of course, intersectionality is everything that works well, of course, comes with a cost and comes with a burden. Because the easy path is never going to get us to where we want to be. And I think lastly, is when you think about intersectionality, like many things I think about equity, justice, that they're not always a destination. They're a practice. You must constantly work at it. It's kind of like health. You don't get to healthy, you maintain health. And so that takes constant work, that takes constant practice, it takes constant reflection. And of course, that's going to wear on you at many times. But the payoff for doing it right, the payoff of working out, it hurts. But the payoff of health and wellness is worth it. Intersectionality and practicing it hurts and wears on you and grinds you down, but the payoff of seeing it affect someone the right way is worth it. So that's what I'll say.
I would add, and Omari, I saw your question in the chat as well. Intersectionality is also really an opportunity for us to unite forces. There are, some issues that definitely affect vastly different groups of people, but because of intersectionality, it could help gain momentum by bringing that together. So in one way, I do think that marginalized groups, to answer your first question, can definitely use that to their advantage. And again, I think part of leading and being an activist is when you recognize you need to step up, but also when you need to step back. And so many of our wins across history, policy-wise, there have been other groups that have stepped up. And under the guise of whatever they were trying to fight for, it benefited, for example, immigrants, or for example, the LGBTQ community, right? So in that way, I think it's especially a opportunity for us to build upon some of the work. In terms of how it's taken a toll on me, I mean, I just cried in front of all of you, so it's certainly taken a toll. And I'll leave it at that. But I have really made an effort after this to check in with people and get the support that I need as well.
Intersectionality has to be intentional, is what I'm going to add to this conversation. You have to not just talk about it, but you actually have to go out and meet people and bring them in. I experienced a lot this summer when I would voice that we need to look for voices that have long been ignored, that do not share the same maybe cisgender identity that we all may have, or that most of our leadership may have. We need to be intentional in looking for people who may experience a disability, who may not be in the same socioeconomic class that we are, the same education standpoints that we are. These not only add solidarity, they bring other things to the table that we would never have thought of. We only can see the world through our eyes, but once we actually add more people to that table, once we make a table that's accessible for everyone and intentional in what we want and what our conversations lead to, you can really start to expand your thinking and expand what your work looks like and help everyone. Inclusivity is intersectional. It has to think about our disabled South Carolinians. It has to think about our Black trans women who are continuously facing higher rates of oppression, violence, and murder. But we're forgetting them. We're still forgetting them. Being intersectional in all of our conversations and all of our work begins with being intentional with who we speak to and who we join with. The toll of activism, I'm going to just echo what they have already said. It's a tough one. I struggle with mental health situations already, and outpouring a lot of my love and my mental health and my time and my sympathy to others takes a toll on me. By Thursday, I usually feel like an empty cup and just want to lay horizontal on my couch and until Monday, really, and just, if someone needs me, they need me. But reminding myself to check in on my friends, but also to have them check on me, making sure that, I nourish my body, not just with good food, but with good company. As well as I can in this kind of COVID situation, making sure that I do take the time to step back from activism. I don't have to be the superhero every single time. The best thing about collective work is knowing you can step back and someone is going to pick up that mantle and keep on doing it for you while you regain your strength. So as much as it's taken a toll, it's also taught me a lot about self-care and a lot about how to, step back for a moment and take care of myself.
So any last words that any of you'd like to say? I think we've, Amari is cheering in the chat box. Any last thoughts or words you might want to share?
Yeah, everything going on, as we all say, when it comes to people protesting against counting votes or stopping votes. And we see this undecided election still hanging really in the balance. I've been dying to check my phone and see what it looks like for Nevada, what it looks like for these states. I want to remind you that no matter who the president is, the work is still going to be here. We are not going to see change overnight. People who still don't believe in racism or still don't believe that Black Lives Matter are going to be our neighbors, our coworkers, our former friends, our family members. We need to keep on working. We need to keep on having conversations just like these in 2021. We need to keep being on the ground to harass our legislators on the state house grounds and be really loud on a weekday so they hear that we are still there, that we still want this work to continue. We can't become complacent.
I'll go. I understand that not everybody here is Christian, but I think about one of the most powerful lines or section of the Bible that I think about repeatedly. It's actually like Isaiah 58, I believe. And it's normally, these people are asking, it's like, God, why aren't you answering my prayers? Haven't you seen me fasting? And like, you're not answering my prayers. And it responds, is that the fasting I asked of you to just make a show of yourself, of suffering, that, you are showing yourself in this kind of way? Or did I ask you to unshackle every person, to lift every yoke, to rid this world of oppression? Once you do that, once you live in righteousness, then I will answer your prayers. And so I will continue to work personally to rid this world of oppression, to lift every yoke that I can find. And that will be the fasting that I enact in my community.
One of my favorite quotes is, and I may not get it right perfectly, but it's nothing worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. And that is something that I remind myself every day, even while we're in this election, is it seems really dark. Some of the results are unexpected, but there are a lot of bright spots. And it's so easy to see the glass half empty. But I think that focusing on those smaller wins, whether it's that new connection you've made that constantly challenges the way you see the world, or whether it's that slight hiring practice that you were able to get modified, or maybe it's connecting with a group of people or being the only white person in a room of people of color for the first time ever, right? It's those little things that add up that lead to this momentum of change. And it's those things that are continuing to give me hope that we will ultimately prevail in our efforts to make South Carolina a more equitable place and our country a place that no matter who you are able to achieve your absolute potential without anyone telling you that you can't. And so I just hope that you hold on to that hope. And I hope that this conversation has helped renew some of that as well. And thank you to Bingo and the University of South Carolina and all the sponsors for really making this possible.
Well, if you all, if the panelists have not had a chance, please scroll through the chat, because you've really reached some folks with your words and your actions today. I am honored and grateful to be in your presence, as I always feel like when I'm around you all, and I cannot wait to work together in the future. I say a lot that you have to build a system to fight the system, and we are all parts of that, and I believe we'll get there. So thanks to all of our panelists, and thanks to all of our attendees. We do have one last session today. Unfortunately, our lunchtime session with Tim Lampkin, who's the founder of Higher Purpose Organization in Mississippi Delta, is not able to present today. So we have our last presentation today at 2 o'clock with Tanya Weidman Davis and Thaddeus Davis, whose dance work has recently been highlighted on PBS NewsHour. And they'll be talking about dance as radical labor. So thank you all, and we'll be back here at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.